What's going on, everybody? I am back, second time this week, doing a bonus episode of the Club and Sub podcast for Bellator 297. This one's going to be taking place tomorrow night. I think it's a 6 p.m. Eastern start, if I'm not mistaken. 15 fights, a really good card. As usual, guys, if you like the show, please drop a like and subscribe. I'd appreciate it. My co-host on the Club and Sub podcast on Wednesday, I would appreciate it. Yeah, packed weekend of MMA here. We got PFL, we got LFA, we have Bellator, we have UFC. For our UFC show, you can check it out on the channel. We did one last night at 7 p.m. Eastern. We do one every week. For PFL, I wanted to get a show up there, but I had a kid this week, so that was awesome. But it's kind of cramped tape a bit here, so I'm kind of scrambling to get all tape in for that card. But yeah, I mean, this Bellator card, it's great on paper. I think it's pretty good for betting, personally. Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. 15 fights. I have a fairly heavy slate here. A lot of dogs. We'll see if it works out. But yeah, first fight of the night. We got Cody Law taking on Edwin Chavez. Law minus 500. Comeback on Chavez plus 375. Actually, wow. Law's all the way up to minus 650. Comeback plus 475. I don't have a strong opinion. Law is a guy I have been more or less looking to fade since he got into Bellator. I did not in his last fight, unfortunately. But I don't really think Chavez is the guy to do it. They clearly seems like a get right spot to me. I feel like Law should be better striking, and in the wrestling, he's just superior in every way. Again, I would never, ever back Cody Law at juice, but yeah, he should be fine. In the same vein as that, the next fight, we got Jordan Newman versus Matthew Perry. Again, Jordan Newman's a guy I am looking to fade eventually. He was a standout Division III wrestler. I believe he was a multiple-time national champion, if I'm not mistaken. As far as his MMA game goes, I just don't think a lot of it. He seems like a pretty standard fare American wrestler who just doesn't really have many MMA tools. But, he's clearly improving, and that level of wrestling that he possesses is going to be enough against the lowest of the low. And that's really what he's getting here with Matthew Perry. Perry doesn't seem like he trains particularly hard, has taken losses to a bunch of jobbers. Just, if I'm looking to fade Newman, I don't even need someone to necessarily stuff the takedowns. Just someone with good cardio and a very proactive get-up game. I don't see either of those things from Perry. So, again, like Newman's going to get the takedowns here fairly easily. I was kind of tempted just by the over, just because, again, I think Newman's MMA grappling is fairly flawed. But he is getting better at finishing, and I kind of feel like Perry just giving up after a takedown or two is pretty live. So at 1.5, I'm kind of happy to pass it. No strong feeling there. Newman should roll, and I hope he rolls because they're going to give him a fight. In one of his next couple fights, we're going to get a great opportunity to fade him in a huge number, but I don't think this is it. Third fight of the night, Richie Smolin coming off, a pretty nice win in his last time out. He's taking on Timur Khizriev. Smolin's last victory came against Pyotr Nidzielski, I think is how you pronounce it. He was a decent-sized dog there. I think he was like plus 300. Smolin, somewhat well-known for being on The Ultimate Fighter, comes from SBG. Good jiu-jitsu player, but fairly limited otherwise. Not a very good striker. Pretty mediocre wrestler. Smolin's the kind of guy that I'll be kind of looking to always bet when he is undervalued, just because I feel his game being so jiu-jitsu-centric and his lack of physicality leads the market to undervalue him fairly consistently. But I think he's up against it here. I was a bit skeptical of Khizriev coming into Bellator. I think I faded him in his last fight with Daniel Weichel, but he performed pretty well there. The surprising thing about that was he didn't even really go, the wrestling route in that fight. For most of that fight, he just outstruck Weichel, which really impressed me, to be honest. He obviously is a fairly good wrestler. I think he should be able to beat Smolin everywhere here. He'll probably keep it standing, but I think even if he ends up choosing to go on top, he should be able to stay safe against what Smolin's throwing out there. Big Bird said Khizriev KO on ITD. I don't really disagree. I don't really see much of a way for Smolin to really, get this fight where he needs it to go. Moving on, though, fourth fight of the night. This is an interesting one. Alex Polizzi, he's taken on Carl Moore. I've gone back and forth on this a lot because Polizzi's style is one I inherently really like. The guy is pretty experienced. He has pretty good cardio for the weight class 205, and he's a very proactive wrestler. And, cardio grapplers in the 205-pound weight class tend to be cheat codes. Just the minute winning ability is off the charts. My issue with Polizzi is I feel like the guy is the exact same guy that was fighting in LFA, 5 years ago. He hasn't really made any real improvements on the feet. He is very, very, very easy to hit, and I feel like he's been fortunate that he hasn't been finished more. He's been hurt in a number of his fights in Bellator, but he's only been finished one time by Yoel Romero, which, I mean, no shame in that, in being finished there. But at the same time, his lack of defense is concerning. But he's someone I always really want to play against per minute winners. But Carl Moore, he's a guy I don't really know what to make of. He beat Carl Albrechtsen 2 fights ago, looked good against Maciej Rozansky in his last fight. He had like a 3-year layoff, but it seemed like he was training that whole time. Came in looking in great shape for the Albrechtsen fight, got dominated in the early part of it, but took over in round 2 and finished him. I do feel like, Moore's a pretty good striker and a pretty dangerous jiu-jitsu player. I think on paper, I do favor Polizzi just because I think he's going to be able to get takedowns here and likely be able to mat return at will for large parts of this fight. But as I mentioned, Moore's a decent submission grappler. And so I could see him initiating scrambles with Polizzi here, which could kind of maybe neutralize some of Polizzi's minute advantages. And if it gets to the feet, I mean, Moore's just a much better striker. And so with that dynamic, I'm not really chomping at the bit to bet Polizzi. I'm still kind of thinking about it just because I feel if it goes 15 minutes, Polizzi probably lands 5 to 7 takedowns and probably gets his hand raised at a decent clip. But I also just can't help but feel, despite the fact that he's only been finished, once in his career to date, that more finishes are coming here. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Pepe. I'm probably going to end up passing it. I could only bet Polizzi just because, again, like I mentioned, I think he's a great minute winner. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty cool fight. It's the first of many, many cool fights. 5th fight of the fight at night. Archie Colgan taking on Emmanuel Sanchez. This one, I think, is pretty out there. Colgan currently minus 260. Sanchez comeback is plus 220. I bet Sanchez here. I know there's many, many reasons to really not like Emmanuel Sanchez at in this phase of his career. He's obviously lost 4 fights in a row, and that is, I guess, to some people very concerning, but I feel like I shouldn't say you're not. I feel like it's just not taking into context the fights. Look, obviously lost to Pitbull, no shame there in a title fight. Lost to Mads Burnell in what was actually a very close fight. Got mauled by Jeremy Kennedy. And again, that's kind of been a common theme here. And I think one of the reasons the price is likely where it is we have seen Sanchez get out grappled before. But honestly, he's a pretty good scrambler. The problem was when he faced Kennedy, Kennedy's really good at getting hooks in from the back. And so as Kennedy continued to mat return him throughout that fight, he was finally able to just get to more and more dominant positions. And I feel like, I feel like those performances against Burnell and Kennedy are likely clouding the market's opinion of Sanchez's grappling. Yes, he can be taken down, but most of the time he works up. Burnell is a pretty high-level black belt. Kennedy's a very, very good MMA grappler. And then, of course, I think the fight that's most concerning to most people is the Yancy Medeiros fight, which, look, I mean, him losing a decision to Yancy Medeiros was somewhat surprising to me. But the thing is, Yancy's 11-8, and I get it, we're 12-8 now. No one, loves Yancy. There's nothing sexy about his game. But people forget, Yancy Medeiros, man, the guy was a 10-fight UFC veteran at lightweight. He's got a lot, and welterweight. He had a lot of quality wins. He hung around in the UFC forever, beat John McDessie, beat Alex Oliveira when that actually meant something, beat Eric Silva, beat Damon Jackson. He's kind of a classic, high floor, low ceiling guy, Medeiros, if you give him a striking fight. And so I think it's indicative that Sanchez may not be where he was, but also, again, Medeiros is a better striker than most of the 155 pounders in Bellator, in my opinion. And on the other side, you have Colgan comes from a wrestling background, but in terms of the way he fights in MMA, that's not really it. He will take guys down here and there, but I don't really think he's that good of an MMA grappler. He leaves loads of space. The guys he has taken down have pretty easily been able to get back to guard and get back to their feet. And just in general, Colgan seems to want to just bang, swing really, really heavy hands and just use his speed and athleticism to get guys out of there. And thus far, it's worked out for him. And I kind of expect that's what he'll do here. I think, again, the market might be thinking that Colgan's going to come out and grapple, but I feel like he's putting himself in lots of danger for getting submitted here if he does that. Sanchez is a really good submission grappler. And as I mentioned, Colgan tends to, and Pepe just said it, Colgan tends to give up a lot of space to his opponents. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of room for Sanchez to throw off subs off bottom. And while I usually am happy to fade subs off bottom in the UFC, like, this is Bellator, let's be honest. Archie Colgan's got 7 professional fights. The guy clearly doesn't really know too much about what he's doing from a jiu-jitsu perspective. So I could see Sanchez getting him in something deep. But either way, I don't think Colgan's super, super likely to hold him down. And if that's the case in their standing, well, I mean, Sanchez has much better output than he does. I think he probably has better cardio. It's kind of hard to say with Colgan because he's got most of his finishes are in round 1. His cardio looked okay against Dylan Mantello, who's probably the best opponent he's fought. But at the same time, he was kind of putting it on him. And it's one of those things where sometimes your cardio just holds up better than expected when you're able to kind of just detrain a guy. And so, yeah, I look at this fight and I feel like Sanchez is the more technical striker. I think he's the better submission grappler. I think Colgan's 2 big edges here are his power and his athleticism. And look, Sanchez, it's only his 2nd fight at lightweight, so how will his chin hold up here? Still to be determined, but Emmanuel Sanchez has never been KO'd in his career. He's been hurt a couple times, and surely Colgan could KO him, but this is it's just such a gigantic step up from Colgan. Like, his best wins are Dylan Mantello and Justin Montalvo. Like, that tells me really nothing about him and how he'll fare against a guy like Sanchez, who is going to pump volume for 15 minutes, can threaten him on the mat. Just a fight where he's not going to be safe anywhere. I feel like the step up in competition here alone means this price shouldn't be north of like minus 150-ish. But then you factor in all the other things and the fact that I don't think he's likely to have a ton of success. And I just feel like Sanchez has to be the side here. I have a couple units on Sanchez at early prices, but I think honestly, even the plus 220 is pretty fucking good given the dynamic. Moving on, we got Norbert Novany. He's taking on Kamil Onishuk. Pretty interesting fight because at first, well, I shouldn't say at first glance, before I looked at it, I didn't really think much of it, just kind of assumed, they're probably giving Novany another guy to absolutely knock out here. And then you go and tape it, and it's like, I hadn't really done a deep tape on Novany ever. And all you hear are like people hyping him up like he's one of the best prospects in MMA. But I got to say, I am extremely underwhelmed by what I see on tape from Norbert Novany. From a striking perspective, I mean, his striking is just basically non-existent. He's basically using like a karate stance, like a Conor McGregor or a Stephen Thompson. The big difference is those guys use that stance to use feints and set up counters, whereas Novany has no counters. He has no feints. He kind of just stands there and is very easy to hit. Pretty much everybody that's let their hands go at him has touched his chin. He has been dropped before. I guess where some would say there's competency for Novany is his grappling. His father, I want to say was an Olympic gold medalist in Greco in the 80s. And that's clearly, where he's been able to kind of just have his most success here. I think 4 of his 6 wins are by submission. But again, he's fighting for the most part nothing but absolute bums here. He did have a fight with Will Fleury back in 2019, but I don't know. Like, literally, his last opponent, Andy Manzolo, comes in there 26-9. You actually go and look at Manzolo's record, and it's like all of his wins are against guys who are 0-2, 1-1, etc. So yeah, I mean, Bellator's basically been giving him setup fight after setup fight, and I kind of assumed that's what this was. But then you look at Kamil Onishuk, and the guy, first of all, he's got double the fights that Novany has, but on top of that, he fought in ACA. He went 2-1 in ACA, fought okay competition there, not like top level competition by any means. But then he comes over to the UFC and he fights Castelo Vanstinas in his first fight there. He did get submitted in the second round of that fight, but prior to getting submitted, he stuffed the takedowns fairly easily in that fight. For the first 6 minutes, actually for the entire fight, I don't think Vanstinas got him down once, or maybe he got him down once and he got up, but he more or less shut down Vanstinas' wrestling, which is one of the best parts of his game. What really killed him in that fight were the calf kicks, but he gave him, an honest fight for about 7.5 minutes. Big Bird touched on 2 things that are important. Yeah, I mean, the biggest concern for me with Camille in general is the guy stands very straight up, very, very easy to hit. Like he's definitely there to be clipped. But when I'm watching like him fight, he seems to know what he's doing. He's a very, very good kicker. All of his strikes are very sharp and straight. He's a good wrestler. Like I would wager he's very likely the better wrestler in this fight. As a submission grappler, I mean, Novanni's certainly better here. And I do think he could sub him. Like there's no question about that. But I just look at it and it's like, okay, Novanni's 23. He's coming off, well, he fought Manzolo a couple months ago, but prior to that was off a big layoff. But the thing is, part of that layoff was he spent a year and a half on the sidelines because of a torn ACL. Like the guy wasn't getting meaningful minutes in. Now, yeah, he should still be improving, no doubt. But the other side of that, Camille's 26, and he has been training pretty much nonstop at Tiger Muay Thai and then Killcliff FC for the last year and a half or so. You know, he was posting pictures about wrestling practice with Usman and Jason Jackson like a month ago. You know, this guy already had a decent base, and I think it's likely that he's going to be making big improvements as well. And so like when I'm looking at it, it's like, I feel like Camille is the better striker here. I think he is the more likely of the two to win this fight by finish. He's been extended more than Novanni has in his career so far. And I think he's the better wrestler and likely improving personally. So like, yes, I think Novanni can submit him if he gets him on the mat for sure. And Novanni does tend to be very, very aggressive about pushing the grappling. But I think he's going to have a hard time getting it there. And Novanni, man, he's so easy to hit standing. So yeah, I mean, I think this line's way off. Camille's my biggest spot on the entire card. I have 2.5 units at plus 210. He's plus 180 at the moment. I think this is, you know, I want to give Novanni some credit and just assume the market isn't completely crazy. And, you know, he is 23 years old. So I don't want to say, you know, Camille should be like minus 150, minus 200. But I actually do like his tape more than I like Novanni's. And like, Novanni's known as being a prospect, but I kind of think the better prospect here is Omnichuk, who actually, to me, seems like if he keeps making improvements, could have, you know, a decently high upside. I'm not saying he'll be a champion or anything, but I think he could probably compete with the top 10 in Bellator if he keeps getting better. So, yeah, I like Omnichuk a lot. Moving on, we got Mike Hamill taking on Shamil Nikaev. Very weird fight, and one that, like, I think I'm going to end up betting Hamill, but initially, like, I don't really like betting Mike Hamill, honestly, because I feel while he's been value in a number of his fights, Mike Hamill's ceiling as a fighter is just so capped on a fight-to-fight basis. You know, he's not really a big hitter. He's a good wrestler, but he's not, you know, a good top position grappler. He can't control guys. He doesn't have much of a jiu-jitsu game. All he really has is cardio and pace. And so I'm always trying to fade that because I'm like, when he fights somebody, when he takes a step up and fights somebody who actually has like plus MMA skills everywhere, they're going to just dumpster him. And I kind of assumed that would be here because when you do the wiki cap on Nikaev, he's got some quality wins. He beat Christos Giagos. He beat Orel Pertea in AC, where I guess then it was ACB. And he's been off for 3 years. So you'd assume some improvements. But man, like diving into the tape on him, I do think he has some talent. Nikaev. He obviously throws pretty straight. I think he's a somewhat imposing striker. And, you know, he's got a decent kicking game. He's a decent wrestler. I can see what people like about him. And off a 3-year layoff, you'd expect some improvements. But I will say, I think his gas tank is horrendous. I think his defense is pretty poor. And even in terms of his grappling, he's got like an explosive double leg, but he doesn't have much control either. Like going back and watching the Giagos fight, which I was very curious about because obviously Giagos is a UFC fighter who's got a fair number of high quality wins. You know, it was just a classic Giagos fight. Basically, Giagos won the first round and then did what Giagos does and cardio death. And Nikaev kind of just outgassed him down the stretch. You know, in his last fight, he fought Cameron Lochtanov 3 years ago, and he won the first 2 rounds clean, but just completely melted down in round 3. Now, again, he's been training. I want to say he's at Killcliff also, maybe. Could be somewhere else. But he's been training pretty hard for 2 years based on his Instagram. So I would expect improvements from Nikaev. The thing is it's just like Hamill's game is so reliable. Like I know what I'm getting from him. He is limited, but he's going to push a pace. He'll probably land a couple takedowns. He's going to be in your face from rounds 1 through 3. Whereas Nikaev, from what I've seen, he's a decent striker. ATT, thank you, Big Bird. He's a decent striker, but he's got really no defense, and he has a horrible gas tank. And again, he could have cleaned all of this up, but even let's say he did. So like in the event that he has improved and he doesn't have the gas tank issues that he did, I mean, Mike Hamill, I'm not saying Mike Hamill's a great striker, but his style just works for MMA. He's a guy who went to a split decision with Adam Boric, who is one of the better strikers in that division. He beat Killys Mota by decision. The guy just has a game that unless you can consistently punish what he's doing, it's going to just score well with the judges. And so I feel like on the one end, if Nikhaev hasn't improved that much, Hamill could look like a big favorite because I feel like he wins round 3 at a pretty high clip, and the output should be fairly close prior to Nikhaev slowing down. And again, if he has improved, I don't think Nikhaev has almost any chance to outgrapple Hamill. Like, could he get a takedown or two? Yeah. He's not holding Hamill down. I'd be shocked at that. And so if they're just going to be banging it out in a high output fight, I feel like Nikhaev's best case is a fairly close fight unless he's KOing him at a high clip. So yeah, I mean, I was leaning Nikhaev, but honestly, after coming out of it, I think I'm probably going to bet Hamill, especially if this keeps going. He's up to plus 120 at the moment. Moving on, Jaleel Willis, Ramazan Karamagomedov. I bet Willis here, plus 210. Still think there's probably some value on the line right now. I think it was plus 170 or plus 180 last time I saw it. Actually, I don't know why I'm even saying last time. I'll tell you right now. It is, minus 225 for Karamagomedov, plus 190 for Willis. It's an interesting fight, and it's one that I think is going to be completely dictated by whether or not Karamagomedov can get him down and flattened out. Willis comes from a wrestling background, and I actually like his hips a lot. Has really strong takedown defense, and he's actually a decent offensive wrestler himself. And he's a good striker. He's a very good boxer. He keeps a pretty high tempo on the feet, has good cardio. And on the Karamagomedov side, it's kind of weird because I feel like this guy, he's fairly young, and I would think he should be getting better. But he went to a split decision with Jordan Williams, which obviously hasn't aged great, on Contender Series a couple years ago. And in the time since, like, he really hasn't seemed to get much better, in my opinion. He fought Kevin Tollison, who is not good at all in CFFC, and was just getting cleanly outstruck in that fight before he was able to get him down. And then in his last fight with John Howard, he dominated the fight, mostly grappling, but even on the feet, like John Howard was like landing shots, and John Howard's a 41-year-old corpse. So that's concerning. And I feel like Willis has like a pretty pronounced striking edge here. Like I said, the big question is, can Nurmagomedov get this down? Because my biggest concern with Willis is I think his jiu-jitsu is very, very sketchy. He just tends to make really bad decisions on the mat, like turning into the wrong side of a triangle, not knowing how to peel guys off the fence. It's just a lot of stuff that makes me think if Nurmagomedov can flatten him out, like, look, if he gets him down along the fence, he might be able to get up. But if he gets him flat on his back, I kind of feel like he's going to be able to pass and dominate. And so it's hard to balance. Like, what do you think will happen here? Like, Crutchmer was an elite college wrestler and is a pretty good wrestler for MMA, and literally got shut out taking down Willis. But at the same time, Crutchmer, as we'll talk about shortly, is a very linear wrestler. Like, it's pretty much he's just firing blast doubles at you, the occasional single off the fence. But if you have the basic defense for that, you can defend it, and Willis did. Whereas Nurmagomedov's a little slicker with his takedowns. I don't think he is I don't think he is in the class of like the Makhachevs or those guys, or even like, the kind of the mid-level dags as a wrestler. But he's good enough, and his jiu-jitsu is good enough that if he does get Willis down, he can maul him. So, like, I feel like with that being the case, you have to make Nurmagomedov a favorite in this fight. But I do trust Willis's experience more. I like that he's got good takedown defense, and I think if he keeps it standing, he's likely to win this fight. So I have a 1.5 units on Willis here. We'll see how that goes. Moving on, Peter Buse taking on Gadzi Rabadanov. I'm not even going to really talk about this. Gadzi's minus 1,100. He's one of the best prospects in Bellator and maybe in MMA. Buse is a French kind of sub-merchant. Gadzi's going to own him. I didn't even really look at it that much, to be quite honest. The fight after this, I actually do have a bit more interest in. Kyle Crutchmer taking on Bobby Nash. I have a small bet on Nash, plus 270. I think it was plus 270. Current line is Crutchmer minus 262, Nash plus 222. I just do not like Kyle Crutchmer's game for MMA at all. He has kind of what I talked about with Jordan Newman earlier, where it's like Crutchmer comes from a very, very high-level wrestling background and is an explosive wrestler. And so as he's coming up, if he's fighting guys who just can't stop his takedowns or get up off bottom, he's been having no issues. But you saw when he ran into Jaleel Willis, he kind of runs out of ideas very, very quickly if he can't just get you down and maul you there. And again, like I said, his wrestling is very, very linear. So I think that's extremely concerning as Crutchmer goes up, because I just don't see many signs of improvement from him. I think his cardio is a bit sketchy, and I think his striking is very, very bad. And he's taken on Bobby Nash, who is a UFC reject, got finished 3 times in 3 fights in the UFC. Biggest 2 issues with Nash are he's gassy, in my opinion, like very, very gassy. And he might have a bad chin. The chin's a little harder to identify just because, Roberts and Song cracked him right on the chin. Both times they knocked him out. But he is gassy, and that is a concern because Crutchmer, while Crutchmer is somewhat gassy himself, he is going to push the wrestling here. And so we don't really know yet, based on Nash's available tape, whether or not Bobby Nash is capable of winning a dogfight. It's not something we've seen him do yet, because most of his fights in his career have been very early finishes. Either he's been finished or finished someone else. Actually, if you look, he hasn't been into a round 3 since 2015. But with that said, Nash comes from a wrestling background. He wrestled at Michigan State University, D1 wrestler, very good wrestler himself, and he is the much, much, much better striker in this fight. Hits pretty hard. He's very dangerous on the feet. Honestly, he got knocked out by Danny Roberts in the UFC, but that fight prior to the knockout and prior to him kind of slowing down, he was competing with Roberts standing, and that was back when Roberts was still kind of in his prime and a pretty good striker. And that performance just leads me to think he's going to piece Crutchmer up on the feet here. Crutchmer pretty much has to get him down. And I think he could possibly, but I also think Crutchmer could get himself subbed. I don't really trust Crutchmer's jiu-jitsu much. And Nash has, I don't know, he's got a reasonable guillotine, but ultimately I just don't think Crutchmer's likely to control him early in this fight. So I'm looking at the fight. I favor Crutchmer just because I think Nash's cardio is such a gigantic liability that, Crutchmer is going to keep pushing takedowns, even if he's exhausted and gassed out himself. But we've seen Nash really just look awful when fights have gotten extended. So with that dynamic, have to favor Crutchmer. But man, I think Nash could potentially keep this standing early. And if so, I almost think the finishing equity alone probably covers his price over plus 200 here. So I lined Crutchmer in the minus 150 range. I have a 1-unit poke on Nash here. I think it's a decent look. More experienced fighter. He fought better competition in the UFC. He's finally getting another chance in a big show here. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But I lean the Bobby Nash side. A lot of dogs here. It's pretty uncomfortable. Vladimir Govea taking on Gabriel Saeg. Govea is, what is his price currently? I think he's minus 500, and the comeback on Saeg is about plus 325. I can't even. Govea is someone who I kind of want to fade just because of the unknowns around Govea. The guy, he had no experience prior to his first UFC fight where he got a KO in round 2 against Corey Mogenberg. And I still don't feel like I learned that much from him. He's an okay grappler, I think. He's an okay striker, I guess, but he hasn't fought anybody. But now he's fighting something called Gabriel Saeg, who is, I would argue is significantly worse here. Saeg took an L to Ryan Delph in his last fight, who's 2-5. The guy was taking L's to bums on the amateur scene. I have no interest in this fight. Govea should roll. But again, he's another one similar to Newman that hopefully he continues to get chalked up because the opportunity to fade him is going to come to us sooner than later. Moving on, we got Daniel James taking on Gokhan Sarakam. This is a fun fight. And it's a fight. Honestly, I have so much fucking exposure on Bellator and UFC. I'm like, do I want to keep throwing fucking darts here? But I don't think it's a dart, but I do kind of lean to the James side here. Not strongly, at all, because on the feet, I feel like Sarakam is leagues ahead of Daniel James. But man, it's really hard for me to unsee how bad Sarakam's looked when he's gotten put on bottom. Kirill Sadelnikov held him there fairly easily when he got him down. Obviously, Syed Soma had a ton of success grappling him. And while I like Soma, Soma's a decent fighter. He's not really a wrestler by any means, nor does he have a particularly punishing top game. And on the James side, it's like if James gets on top of you, he actually is very, very good on top. He's good at passing and good at keeping like his control pretty tight. And he throws pretty ferocious ground and pound. The problem for me is like James just doesn't wrestle that often. It seems every James fight finds a way to the mat, and that's when he gets on top. But he really doesn't attempt takedowns at a high clip at all. Like I think I watched his last like 6 or 7 fights. I think I maybe saw him. He goes to the clinch a lot, but in terms of like going to the clinch and actually trying to drag someone down, I have only seen him try like probably 4 or 5 times across 6 or 7 fights. So it's like it's really hard to trust that he's going to do that here. Like I do think it's a fairly obvious path to victory if he pursues it, but I don't know. Like Sarakam's only got 10 fights. Like I'd imagine he's improving too. And so I wouldn't be shocked if he's manages to keep this standing. And like I said, the biggest concern I have for the Sarakam side on the feet is just James is a bit longer and a bit bigger and just a gigantic hitter, but he really should be miles ahead in terms of just speed and technique. So yeah, I'm kind of torn because like I do think if James gets on top of Sarakam, he's going to wreck him here. But I just don't know what kind of a clip that happens at. So yeah, I'm still thinking about it. I mean, the line is almost big pick right now. I think I would need like plus 125, plus 130 James to take a poke. Also, like I said, I have a load of exposure on this card, and like my gut feeling is Sarakam is just getting better and is going to light him up. So probably going to be a pass. Moving on though, are Phil Davis fights ever really great? I mean, that's a question worth asking in and of itself. But we got Phil Davis taking on Corey Anderson. Corey Anderson minus 175, Davis plus 150. Initially, when I saw the line, I was like, all right, I guess it's time to fade Corey Anderson. Davis could definitely chin him. And as I watched tape and was thinking about it, it's like, yeah, I feel like that's like a very easy outcome to come to in your head. Just like, oh, Corey Anderson's been knocked out before. Phil Davis can knock him out. But it's like, I mean, Corey Anderson is 16-6 fighting like the absolute best guys in the world. It's not like he hasn't fought hitters and dominated hitters in the past. And I wouldn't even really consider Phil Davis a particularly large hitter. Like he only has 5 KOs in his career. It's been 5 fights since he's had one. Like, yes, I do think he could catch Anderson. Like that seems to be the most plausible way Davis wins this fight. But I just don't think it's as plausible as the market's perhaps pricing it here. Do I want to lay minus 175 on Anderson? Not really. But when I'm looking at this, I feel like Anderson's going to outwork Davis. I feel pretty confident saying that. Like I'm almost positive Anderson can't take down and hold down Phil Davis. Like Davis is an elite wrestler and an elite counter grappler. Like that's just not going to happen. But Davis is just a guy who does nothing on the feet against a guy in Corey Anderson who is very, very busy on the feet. He's very, very busy pushing the takedowns. I'm just kind of expecting it to be kind of a standard fair Davis fight here where he loses a clear 29-28 or 30-27 and just based on doing nothing. And even in terms of, just to touch one more time on the finishing aspects of it, Anderson's been really hurting people lately. Like not just, obviously he knocked out Bader, but he finished on the mat, Yagshimuradov, finished Melvin Manhoef on the mat also, knocked out Johnny Walker on the feet. He's been hurting more and more people, like kind of as his career has progressed here. And Davis is fucking old. Like let's see, how old is Phil Davis? Yeah, 38 years old. So it wouldn't really shock me if Anderson knocked Davis out here. Like I almost think their finishing equity is more or less equal, and Anderson just has a lot more upside on points. So I kind of think Anderson should be in the minus 200 range here. Again, I'm not going to play minus 175, but if it got back to minus 150 or better, I might consider it. God, it's like sickening how many bets I have on this card. Moving on, have another one here. Got Sergio Pettis taking out Patricio Pitbull. I bet Pettis plus 165. I think this is like a fight that should be lined pretty much close to pick, honestly. Look, Pitbull, obviously, he's done much more in Bellator than Pettis, and just in MMA generally than Pettis has throughout his career. He's got a lot more fights than Pettis does. But I do think there have been signs that Pitbull has been slowing down lately. Even going back, I know he won the fight, But you go watch the second AJ McKee fight, and a lot of the explosiveness that used to be there in Pitbull, I feel like is starting to fade away. And it's something he's just always relied on. Pitbull is not a guy who has ever been a particularly high output striker. And so he's relied on his power to kind of keep guys in check and keep guys off him. His grappling, look, obviously he's got a dangerous guillotine, but Pitbull is not much of a wrestler, which has kind of been the poison to Sergio Pettis throughout his career. But I actually felt like when I was taping this, Juan Archuleta, I thought posed stylistically more issues for Matthew Chalkcast. Did I bet any favorites? I not on Bellator. I haven't. No. We'll see what happens. But I actually think stylistically, Juan Archuleta posed more threats to Sergio Pettis than Patricio does, just because Archuleta obviously comes from a wrestling background and was not really able to get him down to the mat at all throughout that fight. And so, I don't really think Pitbull is going to be able to do that. Look, in the striking, I think Pitbull could clip him. I think he could hurt him. I think it's possible he could just out-technique him in this fight. And I'm going to say this, and obviously everybody else has talked about this, but Patricio is 35 years old, looks like he's starting to decline, and now he's moving down to 135. It's very hard to think of many scenarios where a move down at this stage in a career have gone well. Aldo, I guess you could say, he won a couple fights at 35 after moving down. But the most recent example we have is Cub Swanson moving down and just getting destroyed by Jonathan Martinez in what was a very sad thing to watch. Am I saying Sergio is going to come out here and destroy Patricio? Absolutely not. I mean, look, Patricio just beat McKee 2 fights ago. He just beat Adam Boric. He's obviously still, got some ability here. But Sergio's 29 years old. The guy looks like he's entering his prime. Yes, he was losing to Horiguchi, but Horiguchi presents a lot of issues, in particular with regard to output, that just Pitbull is not going to present to him. I think Sergio should have a speed advantage here. He is about the same size in terms of height and reach. I actually think he's a bit longer than Pitbull is. Yeah, so basically, I think Sergio is getting better. I think Pitbull is declining moderately. Pitbull moving down brings in a whole litany of uncertainty into this fight. Will his chin be the same? Will he carry the same power? I'm guessing Pitbull probably will not be carrying the same power at 35 that he carried at 45. In terms of durability, hard to say. How's his cardio going to be? Hard to say. We pretty much know what we're getting with Pettis, which is a pretty top-tier striker. Not super dangerous, but keeps a high pace, very good at staying safe on the feet. And he's taking on a guy who, look, Pitbull's an all-time great as far as Bellator goes, but he's jumping up to take on the champ at 35 years old and coming down. To me, most of the certainties in this fight are on the Pettis side. I trust his output more. I trust his cardio more. I think just because of who Pitbull is and because of how dangerous Pitbull is versus how not dangerous Pettis is generally outside of that miracle KO against Horiguchi, I think you have to say this is a competitive fight, but I think it's close to pick. So, yeah, I mean, I bet Pettis small, have a unit on him, plus 165. We'll see what happens with it. Moving on, last fight of the night. Probably my gut instinct is this is going to be a snoozer. We'll see. On paper, it sounds great. Vadim Nemkov taking on Yoel Romero. But every Yoel Romero fight sounds great because Yoel Romero is really fun. He has a bunch of explosive finishes. But they usually end up being pretty boring until something happens, primarily because I think people just tend to respect Yoel's speed, athleticism, and counter ability, so they don't try to engage him very hard. And we've just seen that story over and over again. In terms of this fight, I don't know. There was a part of me that there's still a part of me that wants to poke Romero, but 46 years old against the 30-year-old. At some point, it's going to go over the cliff for Romero, and he's obviously getting closer with each passing fight. Now, is he on good supplements? Very likely. That's probably the case. But I don't know. Nemkov's 30 and seems like he's getting better. I was really fucking impressed with Nemkov against Corey Anderson the second fight. To go from getting mauled like that in fight number 1 to manage distance as perfectly as he did for 5 full rounds in fight number 2 was just remarkably impressive to me. I do think Nemkov should be able to kind of just hang on the outside and just outpoint Romero fairly easily. The one thing that's giving me pause is, like I said, I think it could be a boring fight. And we're not, 3 years at 46 is a huge deal, but we're not that far removed from seeing Israel Adesanya almost lose a close decision just because he was afraid to engage Romero in that fight. And so that's kind of a concern for me, that we could get a staring contest where like margins on rounds are coming down to like one big strike for either guy. And in that kind of fight, it's very hard to cover minus 500. And then the other thing is just, Romero's explosive power. The truth is, I am expecting him to decline here, or to decline very soon, but it's not as if Romero's looked bad in Bellator. He lost a split to Davis, but both of them are like kind of low volume guys, happy to just either win or lose based on that low volume. Finished Alex Polizzi and finished Melvin Manhoef. None of those guys are on Vadim Nemkov's level, but the point I'm making is I think Romero, he's still beating reasonable competition. It's not like he came to Bellator fed him 5-0-2 guys to just munch on, and now we're throwing him into a title fight. You have to lean Nemkov here. He's got to be a decent sized favorite. But man, Romero, he's got so much explosive power and so much finishing equity that like it almost makes me feel like yes, literally it is. It almost makes me feel like potentially his finishing equity could be like cover the number. But at the same time, like Pepe said, Nemkov lightly leg kicking you over 25 minutes is like a very, very live outcome. You saw Adesanya do that. Adesanya really never got in trouble. The one concern is it ended up being a close decision, but at no point in that fight was he close to getting finished. And I think that's kind of my gut as how this goes. I'm probably going to pass. Like if it blows out to like plus 500, plus 600 Romero, I'll poke it for the culture and just to root for Yoel to finally get a title. But at 46, like the downside of Romero could literally be the guy's athleticism was ended up shot in a year's time. Like wouldn't be that surprising against a beast like Nemkov. Yeah, last time Romero fought was 10 months ago. Like that's a ton of time. Yeah, so I think Nemkov should be fine. Romero, obviously some finishing upside. I think his best path is probably, like I said, a staring contest where maybe he picks off rounds on a couple hard shots. But yeah, you have to make Nemkov a big favorite here. Pass for me for now. We'll see where the line goes. But yeah, that is going to do it. I'll just to recap real quick. So far, I've bet Pettis, I've bet Bobby Nash, I've bet Jaleel Willis, I bet Camille Omnichuk, and I've bet Emmanuel Sanchez for this Bellator card. Big weekend this week. A lot of dogs on this card. It's honestly uncomfortable that like 4 of my 5 bets are over plus 200. But that's how the cookie crumbles, as they say. So I'm excited for it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. Please, if you like the show, drop a like and subscribe. I'm going to do one for PFL next week. Probably won't get into PFL stream this week. But yeah, I'm going to try to do more of these going forward. Thanks for coming out. We'll catch you guys in the normal show next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thanks a lot. Take it easy. Good luck this weekend. Peace.